There are basically four ways to solve a quadratic equation. Square root method, factoring the zero product property, completing the square method, and then the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula I use as a last resort, and it comes from completing the square, which I'll prove in a video after this one. So first I'll demonstrate the square root method. The square root method works great if you have x squared minus 4 equals 0, where there's no middle term and there's just a quadratic term. Add 4 to both sides, and you square root both sides. And you should have learned that the absolute value, the square root of x squared, is the absolute value of x. So x equals two numbers, plus or minus 2. To demonstrate factoring the zero product property, I'll use the same equation to show you how that works. I have x squared minus 4 equals 0. You should recognize that as a difference of two squares. X minus 2, x plus 2, and x still comes out to be 2 or negative 2. Sometimes I like this method over the square root method because the square root method, some people forget the negative solution and they just write x as 2, but here it's clear that x also equals negative 2. The next method to demonstrate is the completing the square. You'd use this when you can't factor. Factoring the zero product property is going to be used a lot, but when you can't factor it, the square root method is kind of a handy method. So let me come up with a quadratic that's not factorable. I don't force the completion of the square on every quadratic. I like it when it's this way, where you have a lead coefficient that's 1. The middle term is even, like negative 4, and it really doesn't matter the end term since it can't be factored. So to do this technique, first you want to subtract the 1 on both sides. I like to put a space for the term that completes the square, or gets me that perfect square trinomial. The negative 1 goes on this side, plus the space on this side. To complete the square, I take half the middle term, in this case it's 4, and I square it. Over here I put the number 4, and this becomes x minus 2, the quantity squared, equals 3. If I use the square root method, that's what I want to use now, I square root both sides, I get x minus 2 to equal plus or minus the square root of 3, and therefore x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. Circle that answer so you can see it. Now the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula, I only use it if there's a lead term other than 1, like in this case 2x squared. It can't be factored. So you should have learned that if ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, then I can use the quadratic. So in this case, I've got ax squared, in this case 2x squared plus 4x. So a is 2, b is 4, and c is negative 1. And in using the formula, x would equal negative b, in this case negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 16, minus 4ac, all over 2a, which happens to be 4. When I reduce this, it becomes negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 8, which is 8, all over 4. Further simplifying, it becomes negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 all over 2.